61.4%. Published by the U.S. Census Bureau in 2017, only 61.4% of the eligible citizens old enough to vote did so in the 2016 presidential election. For a country that prides itself on its freedom and rights, that is a low number. And I get it. I know what it's like to feel as if your vote doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. And in that mindset, it's very easy to become disinterested and cynical. But as voters, it is our social responsibility to participate, as we need to pick a leader that best represents their constituents, us. That is why voting matters. Therefore, the fictional representation that best illustrates this everyday struggle is the movie Swing Vote. And while it does tend to satirize the process of the Electoral College at times, it is still the best representation for the United States mindset regarding voting today, as it speaks to the drawbacks of the current system, such as the idea that there is a disregard of the will of the people and the disinterested voter bases, as well as to the benefits of it, and the fact that there is a protection of regional identities and the belief that voting does matter. Additionally, it is a very relevant topic with the upcoming presidential election, and as such, us voters should know how our voting system works before we fully partake in it. Therefore, we should learn this issue. Furthermore, in this speech, I will be going over a quick overview of how the movie Swing Vote represents the current American voting climate, as well as speak to some of the positive and negative ramifications of that representation and how it is seen in modern society. So in the movie Swing Vote, there's a lot of concepts brought up that relate directly back to the process of the Electoral College. There's a lot of good things associated with it, and there's a lot of bad as well. One of the major drawbacks that is seen is the idea that the Electoral College has a disregard for the will of the people. For example, but published by Science in 2007, Bauderger brings up this idea of how Al Gore lost the 2000 presidential election despite winning the popular vote. And that's not the only instance in United States history where it's occurred. For example, published by Britannica in 2019, Beckwith brings up this opposite scenario of how Trump won the Electoral College and thus the 2016 presidential election despite losing the popular vote to Hillary Clinton by more than, quote-unquote, 2.8 million votes. That is a huge discrepancy, and thus an excellent illustration of how the electoral process is ignoring the will of the people, and thus the general decision of the public. In terms of power structure, it speaks to the magnitude of authority that the Electoral College has over the popular vote, and it ends the discussion of who has the final say in this battle of interpolitical systems. Tying this back into the movie, this could definitely have happened in that scenario. We never know who Bud votes for. However, he could have definitely chosen a candidate that did not have the popular majority margin, and thus they would have won the Electoral College without having the public sway. In this sense, it would be fulfilling this drawback that is currently in our system. Additionally, there are other issues in our system that do not lie solely on the Electoral College. For example, the blame should be placed on Americans and their disinterested voter bases. For example, published by Courts in 2016, Collins brings up this idea of how many Americans are not interested in voting and would rather participate in, quote-unquote, the great American tradition of disinterest and apathy. Essentially, there's a lack of motivation there that could probably stem from the idea that politics don't affect everyday life, or that one individual vote can't change anything. That is the mindset that would fit the description of a guy like Bud Johnson in the movie, because he believes that politics and all of that don't have any sway over his everyday life, and thus bear no time should be dedicated to it, or money, or thought, or anything like that. Unfortunately, a lot of people in America have that same mindset, and it's something that we need to change within our current voting system. Additionally, other people might not want to vote because there's increasing polarization within America, and since nothing's getting done, they might think that there's no point in participating anyways. So while there was some drawbacks presented in that movie, like I just talked about, there was a lot of advantages presented too of the Electoral College, such as the idea that the protection of local values and regional identity is shown. For those of you who don't know, the regional identity is this idea presented in Martin and Nakayama's book, published by Hill Education in 2018, that states that each region has their own core values that separate it from their corresponding regions. And that directly relates back to the idea that I just talked about. Published by Intercollegiate Studies Institute in 2019, Dijkkamper brings up this idea of how the Electoral College keeps politics local to your state capital. Essentially what this means is the people who are voting for you and on behalf of you know what values you hold and are thus taking that into account when making their decision. Therefore, by protecting these regional identities through that process I just mentioned, the Electoral College is actually protecting human dignity, as it is making sure that everyone has the freedom to be themselves and express their opinions without fear of marginalization. This concept relates directly back to concepts provided by Feely in the publication Education for Justice, where they talk about how every individual is made in the image of God. Thus, their selves, their opinions, and their votes deserve the same respect that we give to everybody. In that sense, their votes do not deserve to be marginalized or discriminated either. And this can be seen in the movie, because when Bud Johnson makes his final decision, he bases it off of his own values and his own upbringing. He does not do it based off of the identity of New York. He does it off the identity of himself, of Texaco, and that is how it should be, because that is the protection of regional identities, and thus is the showcase of how the Electoral College is successful on that front. Additionally, another advantage shown by this movie is the idea that voting matters, and that a couple of individual votes can change elections. For example, published by NPR in 2018, Elving brings up the 2000 presidential election scenario in which it came down to just a couple of counties in Florida. Essentially, this just illustrates how important voting is, because if those people hadn't gone out there to vote, then the presidential election could have changed, and as a fact, then history would have changed. This is again illustrated with Bud Johnson, because at the end of the movie, he finally realizes the gravity of the situation, how important voting is, and then starts to take it more seriously in his decision-making. Additionally, not only does voting matter, but it is our social responsibility to do so as citizens. Many people across the world do not have the opportunities that we have here in America, such as voting, and so it's a privilege here, and we don't treat it as such. Thus, when we continue about our everyday lives from now on, we need to kind of accept that responsibility and continue to treat it like a privilege instead of treating it like we are now, which is like an option. So in this speech today, I kind of did a quick overview of how swing vote represented the current American voting climate, as well as spoke to some of the positive and negative ramifications that can be seen in today's modern society. And while the movie Swing Vote does kind of tend to satirize the process of the Electoral College, it's still ultimately the best representation of the United States mindset regarding voting today, as it speaks to some of those drawbacks, such as the disregard of the will of the people and the disinterested voter bases, and the benefits, as it speaks to the protection of regional identity and the idea that voting matters. And while that movie does make light of a lot of the authorities and responsibilities in the process, its core message is very much relevant in today's society, because too many people aren't taking enough of an interest or stance when it comes to voting. Too many people aren't engaging enough. And to those people who aren't, I just have one small piece of advice for you. It's published by the University of Texas at Austin in 2017 by an author named Lindo, and it goes like this. If you don't like the way America is run, and yet you don't vote in elections or make your opinions heard, then you, not the government, are at fault. Thank you.